Back to another episode of the Jake Williams Show. I am your host, of course, Jake Williams, and it's very exciting. Episode 38, and this one is coming late, and it's surprising to me. It kind of got away from me. I expected it to be up as usual, but things happen, and it will be okay. We're going to be just fine, and I just want to talk about a few things before I get into today's main topic. So bear with me. I'm not changing the format of the show or anything drastic like that. I think I've used my amount of changing the show for the rest of the time I do this show. So don't worry about that. That's not happening today. I want to talk about kind of the future that I have, set up for the show. Today is going to be talking about fan service. It's going to be called the fan service paradox and all the things that go into just being a fan of things and how once we hit a sequel and things start to change for a game or a movie or a book, comic book, whatever it may be, and how as fans of something we perceive it differently than maybe we should, and somehow that idea of fan service became a little dirty, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I want to talk about the next few episodes. It's going to be a very interesting change of pace, I think. I want to get this out of the way. The Friday before Father's Day, I will actually be recording that a little bit earlier because I will be in Denver. But that episode, it's going to be a very personal episode for me, and it's going to be something that I've kind of thought about doing for a while, and I just think now is the right time to do it. And it's going to be something very personal, and you might connect with you if you've been in the situation. It's going to be all about my dad, and it's going to be celebrating his life and what he meant to me. Because if you don't know me personally, or met me in real life, I don't think I've ever mentioned it on this show. But my father has passed away. It's been 3 years now since he's passed away, and I kind of want to talk about what it's like without him, and also celebrate his life. And maybe that will be able to connect with someone out there that maybe has the same situation I do, and I hope, it's all about healing because, we're all in this together. That will be coming the weekend of Father's Day, and then the 28th, I will be with Derek again. He came back for the Game of Thrones finale episode. He'll be back, and we're going to be talking about the 1-year anniversary of Loud and Opinionated and just how much the brand has changed, how much this show has changed. I mean, this initially was Loud and Opinionated. Now it's, since November, has been full-blown The Jake Williams Show. We're going to talk about how the whole landscape has changed for us and an exciting future. We have some cool things coming down in the future. I know I've said that before, and I meant it. And we're going to be even better, and we're even more excited for, as excited as we were for year one of Loud and Opinionated. Year two, I think, is going to blow it out of the water, and I can't wait because it's going to be an awesome change to everything. Not only this show, but Loud Sports and Underachievers, which I think is just going to be. It's just officially now. It's just party chat at this point, but things are going to be changing, and they're going to be exciting. And I just wanted to give you guys a heads up. I want to be as transparent as possible when I think about these changes that are coming to the show. There's just a couple episodes planned. The next episode this Friday, I'm still working on it. I have 2 ideas for what I want to do. Not 4, 2 ideas that I want to do, and we'll see how that goes. And one of the changes I'm already making to the show, I've kind of figured out how I want to do this now, and this is going to be something going forward. I want to give more video to the YouTube channel. Instead of just putting the audio of these podcasts up, I want to try and put more video content up on Loud and Opinionated's YouTube channel. That's one of the big changes coming. So it's going to be changing and coming forth, and I hope you guys are excited as I am. And let's just jump right into today's topic. So I mentioned it earlier. We live in a weird time for entertainment. I was talking with Paul, who does the sports podcast with me for Loud and Opinionated, Loud Sports. Check it out. Him and I were talking about, which is the weirdest thing. This is how I know I'm getting to an age where I'm starting to pay attention to this stuff more than I ever would have anticipated. But we were talking about, like trade and, what's going on with China and Mexico and all this stuff. But when we talked about how as a society, as a country, our biggest export is entertainment. And now I don't know if that's necessarily true or not. That's just two people talking. But when you think about it, yeah, pop culture is probably the biggest export that this country has, and it's probably the biggest thing that we do. And now you could probably say, well, maybe we should be focused on more traditional things and things like that. But I kind of like the idea that entertainment is a huge aspect to what we do as Americans. I mean, obviously, I dropped political talk on this show, and I leave all the sports talk to the Loud Sports podcast. So I'm talking about video games. I'm talking about movies. That is the majority of this podcast. I mean, there was like a whole month's worth of content that was just superheroes, and I think that's pretty cool and pretty exciting. And I love talking about these things. So we're kind of spoiled, and that's kind of what we do as Americans. We do pop culture, we do entertainment. That's our biggest thing, and I kind of think we should wear it as a sort of badge of honor. And also, maybe we should focus on other exports. That could also be it too. But I think at the end of the day, that's the coolest thing that we do. And that's obviously my opinion. You could probably say we should probably be bigger exporters of food or some sort, energy maybe. I don't know, but that's beside the point. So with being spoiled with all this stuff, especially in this age of the rise of streaming, the rise of just being able to get so much entertainment at the tip of your fingers. I mean, even just Amazon, on my phone, I could get like thousands of comic books just on my phone. I could watch Netflix on my phone. There's so much entertainment that's so easily accessible. And I think because of that, we've become so spoiled with it. And we have different standards. And we've also reached another line, I think, of how we do things. Now, Hollywood has always been about sequels, and they've always been about how do we make this a franchise? How can we market this? Now, that's not necessarily changed. It's always been that way because we want to make money. These are big companies, they're businesses, they want to find ways to make money. But I think because of the internet and because of all the accessibility to entertainment, we've kind of become more fickle and heinous about these things. And I've talked about fandom multiple times on the show. Back when it was just Derek and I, we talked about the power of fandom and how things can change for the better and the worse. And I dedicated a whole episode about Star Wars because I think a big chunk, not all, but I think a big chunk of the Star Wars fandom is toxic at times. Now, I'm not saying all of them. I don't believe in lumping everybody in one thing, but there's definitely a group online that has some serious weird issues going on. And that's why I think it's weird that the term fan service is kind of a negative thing now. There's obvious positive forms of fan service, and I'll talk more about that as well, but there's just some weird negativity that floats around it. Now, if you're looking at fan service and saying, well, I would prefer that a better story would come out of something than, say, fan service for fan service sake, that's totally understandable, and I get that. But when you watch something like Avengers Endgame, and at this point, these movies, this is 11 years of Marvel movies, of the MCU, 11 years of this, it's everything that you're going to see in that is going to be fan service. There's no changing what that is. That is always going to be fan service. Now, I'm sure there's negative reviews out there, but I've come out and said, if you listen to my spoiler cast on the show, I've come out and said this to my friends as well. I think it's a perfect movie. When people ask me, what do you mean there's no such thing as a perfect movie? Obviously, there are issues with the movie. There's flaws with every single movie. I'm sure you could find flaws with Citizen Kane or Casablanca or, any of the like top 100 AFI movies, these masterclass films. You could find negative things about them. But for me, it was a perfect movie. And that is a movie that is 3 hours worth of fan service. And it just hits the right tones. Every moment that happens that is fan service to that movie works. And I'm sure there's people that's differently. That's just how we are as humans. But everything in that movie is 100% fan service. Yes, there's things to move the plot forward. Yes, there's things to change it. But this movie literally goes back in time to other movies in the MCU. And the end of this movie is a gigantic, like the last 45 minutes of this movie is a gigantic fight with every single character that you've seen in the MCU getting a chance to fight Thanos and his army. And that is a great example of fan service going well. And I have never thought anything negative. I knew that that was going to be it going in, and that's what I wanted. But you also see things where, like, there's the final episode of Game of Thrones. And I've talked about that as well. And however you felt about Season 8, there is a moment where I did mention this, where I thought that could have been perceived as a negative experience of fan service, where you have a bunch of characters that you haven't seen in a long time, or you're finally seeing them all together, kind of forming a council of like all your favorite characters of these different families and different houses in that show, which, spoilers, I guess, if you haven't watched the finale of Game of Thrones, which you probably should have at this point. I mean, everybody's seen it at this point. It's been like, 2-3 weeks? You've had your time. But there's that scene, I could see how people could be upset, and that could be an example of fan service not working, because it's a moment of, well, narratively, I don't know if this necessarily makes sense, and I don't know if it's necessary, and it feels like something just to give fans to talk about and move on, because the creators have to know that there are tons of YouTube videos and tons of podcasts that talked about this show during its run. So maybe they did put that scene in there to get people talking, and that is a negative experience of fan service. So what I think is intriguing about that term fan service, or that use in pop culture, it's so weird to talk about, because it really is a paradox. Because on one hand, isn't that what you want? Isn't that the point? I mean, you think of the name fan service. It is servicing you with this story and saying, look, these are characters that you love. These are things that you love. We're giving this to you and showing you that we care about you and we're here for you. But then on the other side, you're like, well, I appreciate that. That's really cool that you would do that. But why don't we do something that works in the story and makes me happy about the story? And it's a weird thing, because we like to trick ourselves, especially with something like Avengers, which, again, I thought is a perfect movie. It's the best superhero movie I've ever seen, in my opinion. These are products, right? And as someone, and someone listening to this, as a consumer of the product, you have to think about, they're doing something that you want. So I don't know. Sometimes I think the problems we run into, and rightfully so, I think we have a huge problem, especially with Disney, and I'm going to dedicate a whole episode to how I feel about Disney and what's happened with them and with the merger with Fox and everything. But we have to look at it this way. Yes, most cases, these, especially if they're big blockbuster franchises, they are run by corporations. They are run by a huge company, and I understand that. So when you start looking at it and you peel back the layer as it is a product, and I'm not saying these aren't pieces of art. You see what I'm saying, where it's hard to talk about this particular topic in a certain way without frustrating someone, but that's life. When you look at them as products, and maybe not necessarily a piece of art, if you are a curator, a producer of a good, and you are trying to present something to the market and to a consumer, when you are presenting that, wouldn't you want the consumer of your product to be satisfied and want everything out of your product? Right. I feel like anybody watching or listening to this says, yes, that's what I want. Now, if you look at it as a form of art, this is where you could be upset, because you're saying, well, you're sacrificing a story and a work of art for an obvious monetary gain and a form of consumerism, which, again, completely understandable. There are moments when I've seen something in a movie and I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. That's just like, this is clearly a thing to sell toys. I mean, if you look at Young Justice, when it came out on Cartoon Network and it's an original run, it was canceled because it couldn't sell enough toys. It was clearly used as a product, and that could be frustrating, and I understand that. But this is why it's such a big paradox, because where you might sacrifice art to make money, people can get frustrated. But at the same time, you cannot tell me that when Marvel set out to do this 10-year thing, they weren't going to obviously put things in their movies to make you happy. Now, they did a great job of making it work narratively, so that's why people are okay with it. Or, you might run into a situation where, something in the DCEU, they do something that's like, why are we doing this? We're doing all, like the death of Superman in BVS, or just the name Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice could very well be the worst sign of fan service, because it's like, well, people went to see Man of Steel but necessarily didn't like it, so let's throw in Batman because Batman makes us money. He's the most Googled superhero. He's like the biggest superhero, and arguably the biggest superhero on the planet. So we got to put him in there. That could obviously be considered a version of fan service. And where I'm going with this is, if you can find a way to work it in narratively that makes sense, I don't see a problem with fan service. I don't see a problem with people saying, look, here's what, this is a nice little treat for you for watching this movie, seeing sticking with us for 11 years and seeing all these movies if you're Marvel, or if it's just a trilogy, if it's like saying, hey man, look, you sat through 2 other movies of this and you experienced the climax of this. Thank you for that. Here's something for you to enjoy. It's so hard to think about, because that's why I like it. Rarely do I ever complain about fan service. I don't think, because for me, I'm not, and this is where it gets tricky. Don't take this the wrong way. I'm not ungrateful, and I'm not saying that people that don't like fan service are ungrateful. That's not what I'm trying to get at. But what I'm trying to get at is, I appreciate that these people took time to make this fun and exciting. Now, what I was talking about earlier with how you can run into the situation where this is art versus product. If it's something like maybe Game of Thrones, where it doesn't necessarily work narratively, then I'm not going to freak out or be upset about it. I'm just going to be like, I appreciate what you're doing here, but wouldn't it make a little bit more sense if we went a different route? You know what I mean? So that's kind of where I stand on it, and that's why I think it's a true weird paradox. And it goes back to what I've talked about before, when I talked about it on the Power of Fandom episode, or when I talked about the Star Wars episode. We have this weird sense of ownership over these properties. And I understand where that can come from, because, look, I'm a wrestling fan, and I am very much someone who thinks I have ownership over WWE and what happens there, and I know that's absolutely not true. Only one person controls that. But we and rightfully so, we do have a little feeling of ownership over it, because if it weren't for us, the consumers, reading books or watching the movies or, playing the video games, if it weren't for us doing that, there would be no fan service, there would be no product, we wouldn't be consumers. And I totally get where that can come from, but at the end of the day, we have to give up that sense of power, because we do have that power. We do have the ability to vote with your wallet and say no to things, and I've done that before, and I encourage people to do that. If you truly don't want something to happen, or you don't like something to happen, go for it. Vote with your wallet. But it doesn't necessarily mean we own that, and that is the creator's choice to tell the story that they want or do the thing they want. Now, when it's a creator doing that, and again, it kind of twists it back into, is this the product or is this art? It runs into, if it's a creator doing something narratively that you don't appreciate or understand, tough, man. That's just the story they wanted to tell. That's the arc they wanted to go on, and that's their wishes. Now, if it's somebody like, when we've seen it multiple times, but I use superheroes because they're like, it's the Western of our time. It's the popular genre. You see it with like Fox, with what they did with Fantastic Four, with the reboot of that, and how Joshua Trank said that they changed a lot of things and they took over a lot of that movie. And you can tell when that happens with a studio, because you can tell when a movie's just chopped to bits and things just don't make sense, or things seem to be moving at a much faster pace than they were before, and things like that. So yes, you see those things happening. And when a corporation does that, you can see where that mistake happens. So I know it seems like I'm just talking in circles and I'm not making sense. But ultimately, what I'm trying to say with the reason it's a paradox is because as fans, we want fan service. When we love something, we want those moments. I mean, when Cap, spoilers for Endgame, which again, you've had like a month to watch it. Come on now. But when Cap is able to wield Mjolnir in that movie, I was putting my hands on my head, I was hooping and hollering, and everything about that last act, that third act of that movie, was absolutely, well, all the movie, but very much in those final 45 minutes, that movie that was all fan service. And that worked narratively because that was the story they were trying to tell. Kevin Feige was planning this out and having that type of story being planned out. Now, did Disney get involved and change things and hurt things and, this, that, and the other? Of course they did, because it's Disney, and it's, when you have this much money invested in something, you're going to make statements and you're going to change things. And I could do a whole different episode on who really should have creative control over something. Should it be the directive? Should it be producers? Should it, this, that, or the other thing? And what it comes down to is if it's done right, and you have to do it right, you have to do it in a certain way. And I think to truly make fan service work is you cannot look at it as a product. And even though it is a product and we are consumers, you have to look at it as this is the art that you want to deliver to us. Because if we wanted a product that was going to be delivered to us in a certain way and we were going to consume it in a certain way, we wouldn't have entertainment. We wouldn't have these movies. We wouldn't have this kind of emotional hook to these things, because we have products that exist that solely do their job for us as consumers. That's literally any other product that you can think of, whether it be food, whether it be clothing, whether it be your phone, whether your laptop, any sort of thing that you use in your everyday life is a product that you want to work the right way. And you don't have an issue of, well, I don't know, does this text font look like it's just trying to make me happy and give me fan service and make me just like, oh, well, that's what I got the ticket for. No, you don't necessarily have that. And I know that I said earlier that you have to look at them as products. You have to, in a way, to fully understand what fan service is and the positives and negatives of it. You have to sit down and look, okay, this is a product. These are corporations. I am a consumer. But if you can do that in a way where it's veiled enough that it does feel like an artistic approach to it, and it's done the right way, I want all of it. It's awesome. It's great. And I think that's where people get upset. And I think that's why there's the paradox. You can tell when something is manufactured by a machine and by a studio, whether it be Disney or Warner Brothers or Sony or whatever, But when it's done in a way that's like, as I said, Endgame, and I keep using that because, good God, what other movie is 3 hours of just straight up fan service? It's insane. When it's done that way, and done with the care and the amount that it's done, it's great. It's perfect. And it's exactly what you came for and what you want. So I guess that's all I could talk about it. I've managed to ramble on more than I expected about fan service. I want to know what you guys think. Do you think that fan service is good? Do you think it's bad? Do you think that we should look at it as a product and a consumer rather than art and an audience? I don't know. Let me know. Am I a madman? Am I absolutely crazy? Let me know down below. Just in the comments on the and I'm more than willing to talk about it because I think it's an interesting paradox. It's an interesting way that we think about movies and TV and entertainment, and it's oddly enough the only product, I guess, the only thing that's in your life that you have these thoughts about. You don't look at your phone and be like, well, is this feature added to my phone? Is this fan service? Is this thing, you think about accessibility, you think about it in a different way than you would necessarily a story. I think it's an interesting topic and it's worth talking about. So you can follow Loud and Opinionated on all the social medias. On Facebook, you can like it, Loud and Opinionated. On Twitter, @Loud Opinionated. And check out the other shows on Loud Opinionated's network. Party Chat, the Underachievers podcast, Loud sports. If you're into sports, then yeah. Most importantly, even if it's yelling at me about fan service, be loud and be proud.